was Amelia Earhart. Chapter 5, Amelia becomes a hero. Amelia met with George Putnam and Amy Guest in New York. They both thought she was perfect, attractive, polite, well-educated. She got the job. The job was actually not nearly as good as it sounded. Amelia wouldn't get paid. A man named William Stoltz would fly the plane. He'd get $20,000. Although Amelia was called the captain, she was really just a passenger. Got a lot of money and she got none. That's sad. Why did Amelia agree? First, no woman had ever crossed the Atlantic by plane. The experience alone was enough to make Amelia go. Amelia summed up her feelings in a letter to a friend. When a great adventure is offered to you, you don't refuse it. That's all. Amelia also hoped that if the trip was successful, all the attention would bring her other flying jobs. The flight was very dangerous. Charles Lindbergh had made the trip safely, but 14 other people had died trying to cross the ocean. 3 had been women. Still 2 other women pilots were already planning to try. Amelia had to move quickly if she wanted to be the first. The plane, called the Friendship, took off from Boston on June 3, 1928. However, the crew had to land in Canada because it had bad weather. Many days went on. The Friendship was still not able to take off. Amelia discovered another problem. Her pilot, William Stoltz, drank too much. If Wilmer got drunk, she knew he couldn't fly the plane. But if they didn't take off soon, Amelia would lose the record. It was now or never. On June 16th, Amelia made a decision. She told Wilmer to get ready to fly. They were leaving the next day no matter what. On the morning of June 17th, Amelia sent a cable to George Putnam back in Boston. The cable read, Violet, cheerio, A.E. Violet was a code name. It meant that the Friendship was taking off. Through the long flight, Wilmer Stoltz and his co-pilot, Slim Gordon, took turns flying the plane. Amelia wrote notes in her journal. After 20 hours of flying, they knew they were low on fuel. Could they find land on time? The answer was yes. The Friendship touched. There's a route. This shows from Boston. And this one, while Lindbergh had gone to Paris, she was going to Wales. So that's really cool. Touchdown in Bury Point, South Wales, 20 hours and 40 minutes before it took off, after it took off from the Canadian coast. They had done it. On June 18th, 1928, Amelia Earhart became the first woman to cross the Atlantic Ocean, by plane that is. What came next was a surprise for Amelia. The trip made her an instant hero. Amelia hadn't flown the plane, but people still thought that she was very brave. In London, Amelia was entertained by the rich and famous. She had tea with royalty. On her return to America, Amelia was met with even greater excitement. There was a parade and speeches. Crowds of people wanted to see and hear the brave female. Many people compared Amelia Earhart to the co-pilot, to the famous pilot, Charles Lindbergh. They thought that Amelia, who was tall and slim, even looked like Lindbergh. Amelia's nickname was Lady Lindy. George Putnam liked this a lot. He knew that he could make Amelia even more famous. Cha-ching. All the attention was hard on Amelia. Sometimes she was frightened by the push of people trying to get near her. However, Amelia was a smart woman. She knew that she would have to be in the spotlight if she wanted to fly planes and break records. Amelia also knew if people got excited about flying, then the tiny airline business would grow. And Amelia hoped to be part of that business. If Amelia made speeches, she would also be paid. That meant that she could buy another airplane. With her own airplane, she could set more records. That would lead to even more speeches and more money. That would lead, for the first time in her life, Amelia started to believe that she could actually make a living by flying. George Putnam became Amelia's manager. He set up a lot of public appearances for her. In 6 months, Amelia made over 100 speeches and gave more than 200 interviews. Amelia did not complain about her busy schedule. She was given a new car for an appearance at an auto show. She also made money by letting companies use her name to advertise their products. The fur-lined leather Amelia Earhart flying suit became very popular in the New York department store. Amelia also became an editor of the Cosmopolitan magazine and wrote a column about aviation. Amelia didn't really like to write, but the articles brought more publicity. Many of the magazine's leaders thought that Amelia was a good role model for young girls. By 1929, Amelia was the best-known female pilot in America, but what Amelia really wanted was more time flying. So a week before she turned 32, Amelia purchased a second-hand Lockheed Vega. It was a big plane that was hard to handle, but it was built for speed and distance, and as soon as possible, Amelia wanted to set more records. The first woman cross-country air race was going to be held later that summer. It was called the Women's Air Derby. Whoever flew from Santa Monica, California, to Cleveland, Ohio, in the shortest time would win. Amelia was eager to enter. The course, which went over the Rocky Mountains, was dangerous. It was dangerous. The Rule Committee considered changing the flight path to make a male navigator go along in every plane. So they didn't trust the poor girls, even though they'd flown and shown how well they were. Needless to say, Amelia was very angry. She and the other women pilots had flown many hours alone. Amelia said she would not enter the race if she couldn't fly on her own. Because of Amelia and several other female pilots, the committee backed down. The women would fly the whole course by themselves. On August 18, 1929, 20,000 people turned up in Santa Monica, California for the start of the race. There were 19 pilots, including Amelia. Many people did not take the woman seriously. Will Rogers, a famous writer of his time, called the race the Powder Puff Derby. Still, by that Sunday afternoon, all 19 planes were in the air and racing against the clock. The race was to take 8 days, but there were problems from the start. Planes broke down, landing fields were not in good shape, and on the second day, Amelia's plane flipped over on landing. Ouch! She wasn't hurt. She was able to fix her plane and keep racing, but others weren't so lucky. Some planes went off course and crashed. One pilot died in the mountains of Arizona. On August 25th, the race was over. Only 11 of the 19 women finished. Amelia Earhart came in third. Even though she didn't win, Amelia learned a lot. She also got to know many of the best women pilots in the country. After the race, many women pilots decided it was time to start their own group. On November 2nd, 1929, 26 women met in an airplane hangar in Long Island, New York. They wondered what to call themselves. Amelia suggested that they name the club after the number of women who joined first. The other pilots liked the idea. Over the next several months, the name changed from the 86s to the 97. Finally, the 99s were the name that stuck. Amelia worked to get more women pilots to join. By the following summer, the 99s had almost 200 members. The group helped women pilots get jobs. The 99s also had an office where careful records of women aviation's achievements would be kept. Amelia Earhart was elected the first president of the group. Sometimes Amelia felt she didn't deserve all the praise that the public gave her, but she had truly earned the respect of the other women flyers, and it meant a lot to her. Amelia had to keep earning money, but that was not easy during the Depression. She still gave speeches, but she had another job too. Amelia helped start an airline on the East Coast. It was called the New York, Philadelphia, and Washington Airline because it flew between those cities. Amelia's job was to convince people to fly on the airlines. It was difficult to run an airline in the early days. Only a few cities had airports. Once 3 planes arrived in Philadelphia at the same time, some passengers had to change planes. Some just got off to stretch their legs, but airplane workers got confused. They put people on the wrong planes. Some were actually flown back to the city where they had just left. Another problem on the early flights was air sickness. It wasn't just the bumps. Fumes from the engine often came into the cabin. Yuck. There also was no air conditioning. Sometimes more than half the passengers on a plane threw up. Ew! Still, more than 1,500 passengers flew on the tiny airline during the first 10 days. That's a good number. Amelia was happy to report that almost half the tickets had been sold to women. So, aviation industry. Today, traveling by plane seems as normal as taking a bus, but it wasn't always that way. In fact, your grandparents may not have stepped foot on an airplane until they were grown-ups. At first, airlines primarily delivered mail, not people. But the many small companies that carried mail sometimes allowed passengers to travel as well. By the late 1920s, these small companies combined to form 4 larger airlines: TWA, United, Eastern, and American. They were known as the Big Four, and were the first to schedule passenger-only flights. In 1923, the first nonstop flight to travel across the country carried passengers from New York to San Diego. It would be another 30 years before a passenger jet traveled nonstop between New York and London. By mid-century, the airline industry in the United States had truly taken off. Besides working with the airlines and taking care of her family, Amelia was still trying to set records. That was part of being Amelia Earhart, the celebrity. In the summer of 1930, Amelia set 3 new speed records. The fastest speed recorded was 180 miles an hour. Today, the average passenger jet flies around 500 to 700 miles per hour. Amelia was doing exactly what she had dreamed of doing. It was an exciting time. But then, in the September of 1930, Amelia received bad news. Her father had cancer. He would not live much longer. Amelia flew out to see him in California. She stayed with her father for 4 days. She took care of him and said goodbye. During her return trip to New York, she got word that her father had died. It was a very sad time for Amelia. She missed her father. She was under a lot of pressure. She worked for an airline. She gave speeches all over the country. She raced her airplanes and set records. She took care of her family. Amelia was tired. She needed help. Amelia turned to her longtime manager, George Putnam. George Putnam was divorced now and wanted to marry Amelia. Amelia had said no many times, but maybe marriage to George Putnam could be different. George was 10 years older than Amelia. He already had 2 grown children. George wouldn't expect Amelia to stay at home. In fact, he wanted to help her become even more famous. Amelia decided to take the risk. On February 7th, 1931, she and George Putnam were married. Both bride and groom were in agreement on one important issue. Amelia could definitely keep her career, because that was very important to her. And although she didn't plan it, she even got to keep her name. Although she officially became Amelia Earhart Putnam after her marriage, the press didn't like the change. They soon dropped Putnam and called her Amelia Earhart, just as they had always done.